People like you always think the rules will bend if you stand at the desk long enough. Ethan Caldwell said it with the polished calm of a man who believed cruelty sounded respectable when spoken quietly. At 10:47 p.m., Claire Bennett stood beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Halston Grand Hotel, rainwater darkening the shoulders of her worn beige coat, while the night clerk decided she did not belong there. He thought refusing her a room would protect the hotel's reputation. He had no idea that before midnight, the marble floor beneath his shoes, the walnut desk beneath his hands, and every room rising 20 stories above him would belong to her. Outside, cold October rain swept across downtown Boston, turning the windows into trembling sheets of silver. Inside, the lobby glowed with warm golden light. Soft piano music drifted from hidden speakers. Brass luggage carts stood perfectly aligned near the entrance, and a tall antique clock behind the front desk marked each passing second with a steady mechanical click. Claire approached the counter carrying a plain canvas bag. Her chestnut hair was tied loosely at the nape of her neck, and her flat black shoes still carried traces of water from the sidewalk. She wore no designer jewelry, no expensive watch, and nothing that announced importance. Ethan noticed all of it in a single glance. At 34, he had perfected the art of judging guests before they spoke. Tailored suits received warm smiles. Luxury handbags earned immediate attention. People who looked uncertain were made to wait. People who looked ordinary were reminded of the price. "Good evening," Claire said. Her voice was soft, but steady. "I need a room for one night." Ethan's fingers remained resting on the keyboard. He did not ask for her name. He did not check the reservation system. Instead, his eyes moved from her damp coat to the canvas bag at her side. "We are fully booked." Behind him, a computer screen reflected faintly in the polished glass cabinet. Claire could see rows of green indicators marking available rooms. 12 of them. She looked at the screen, then back at Ethan. Her expression did not change. "Are you certain?" "I was told. You still had availability this evening." A small smile touched Ethan's mouth, but there was no kindness in it. "Our rooms begin at $800 a night, ma'am." He emphasized the price as though translating something difficult. Claire reached into her bag and placed a credit card beside her identification. "That will not be a problem." Ethan glanced at the card without touching it. At the neighboring station, Natalie Brooks paused while organizing key envelopes. She had seen the open rooms on the system. She also saw the quick warning look Ethan sent in her direction. Claire noticed that too. She noticed everything. The empty luggage cart, the untouched key packets, the reservation screen, and the way Ethan's posture changed whenever a well-dressed guest crossed the lobby. "Perhaps there was a cancellation," Claire said. "Would you check?" Ethan finally placed one hand on the keyboard, tapped 2 keys without looking at the monitor, and shook his head. "Nothing available." The antique clock clicked behind him. 10:48. Claire rested her fingertips lightly on the counter. "Then why does your screen show 12 vacant rooms?" Natalie stopped moving. Ethan's smile disappeared. For the first time that evening, the grand lobby seemed to hold its breath. Ethan's eyes flicked toward the reflected screen, and for half a second, the confidence drained from his face. Then he straightened his burgundy tie and leaned closer to the counter, lowering his voice as though Claire had committed some private offense by noticing the truth. "Those rooms are not available to the public," he said. Claire glanced again at the green indicators. "They are listed as standard king rooms." Natalie kept her eyes on the key envelopes, but her hands had gone still. She knew Ethan was inventing policy as he spoke. He had done it before with guests he considered inconvenient, always careful to use language vague enough to sound official. "Availability is determined by management," Ethan replied, "not by what a guest happens to see on a screen." The antique clock clicked forward to 10:52 p.m. Claire slowly withdrew her credit card from the counter, but she left her identification in place. "Then please explain the restriction." Ethan's expression tightened. He had expected embarrassment, perhaps an apology, perhaps a quiet retreat into the rain. Instead, she was asking questions with the calm precision of someone taking notes. "The rooms may require special authorization," he said. "Corporate holds, maintenance reserves, executive use. There are many details you would not understand." Claire looked past him toward the silent elevators, the polished brass fixtures, and the arrangement of fresh white lilies beneath the chandelier. "How many rooms are currently under maintenance?" Ethan blinked. "That is internal information." How many are under corporate hold? Also internal. And who authorizes their release after 10 o'clock? Natalie raised her eyes. Those were not the questions of a stranded traveler. Claire spoke like someone familiar with occupancy reports, night audits, and the quiet decisions that shaped a hotel after most executives had gone home. Ethan noticed Natalie watching and snapped. Do you need something? No, she answered quickly, though concern remained in her face. Claire placed one hand over her identification. I am not asking for confidential records. I am asking whether a room can legally be sold to me tonight. Legally, Ethan repeated with a thin laugh. This is a hotel, not a courtroom. Then the answer should be simple. Before he could respond, the revolving door turned. A white couple stepped into the lobby beneath a large black umbrella. The man wore a charcoal overcoat, and the woman carried a structured leather handbag with a gold emblem. Ethan transformed before Claire's eyes. His shoulders relaxed. His smile became immediate and warm. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, welcome back to the Halston Grand. The man removed his gloves. Our flight arrived early. I hope you have something available. We did not make a reservation. Of course, Ethan said. His fingers moved quickly across the same keyboard he had barely touched for Claire. I can offer you a corner suite on the 18th floor. Natalie looked at the screen, then at Claire. The room Ethan selected had been green the entire time. Mrs. Whitmore smiled. Perfect. Ethan prepared the keys, offered late checkout, and called for someone to take their luggage. Only after the couple moved toward the elevators did he look back at Claire. She had not raised her voice. She had not moved from the counter. I thought there were no rooms, she said. Ethan's pleasant expression vanished. Some accommodations are reserved for guests who meet the standards of this property. The words landed softly, but everyone nearby understood them. Claire's eyes remained steady. And what standard have I failed to meet? The clock behind him continued its patient countdown. Ethan looked at her worn coat, her canvas bag, and her rain-damp shoes. Then he made the mistake that would follow him long after midnight. People who belong here do not usually need that explained. The lobby went silent. For one long second, Claire said nothing. The humiliation was not in the volume of Ethan's voice, but in the certainty behind it. He had looked at her coat, her shoes, and her canvas bag, then decided those details gave him the right to measure her worth. Near the elevators, Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore slowed their steps. A businessman seated beside the fireplace lowered his newspaper. Natalie stood frozen behind the neighboring terminal, her face pale with discomfort. Ethan mistook the silence for victory. I have tried to be discreet, he continued, speaking loudly enough for the surrounding guests to hear. But the Halston Grand has a responsibility to protect its atmosphere. We cannot simply provide rooms to anyone who walks in from the street. Claire's gaze remained steady. I walked in through the same door as everyone else. That is not the point. Then tell me the point. Ethan drew a quiet breath. At 11:03 p.m., his need to defend his judgment became stronger than his professionalism. The point is that we deal with a certain level of clientele. Guests who understand our rates, our expectations, and how to present themselves appropriately. The businessman folded his newspaper. Mrs. Whitmore turned fully toward the desk, her earlier smile gone. Claire glanced at the credit card still resting between them. You never attempted to process my payment. There was no reason to. You never asked whether I was a member of your rewards program. That would not change the situation. You did not request a deposit, check another property, or offer to place me on a waiting list. Each sentence was calm, but together they stripped away every excuse Ethan had constructed. His jaw tightened. You are making this unnecessarily difficult. Claire looked toward the reflected reservation screen. No, I am asking you to explain why an available room was given to someone who arrived after me without a reservation. Ethan glanced around and noticed how many people were listening. A wiser man might have corrected himself. Ethan chose pride. Because they are established guests. And I was never given the chance to become one. Ma'am, this conversation is over. He reached for her identification, sliding it across the polished counter with 2 fingers. There is a motor lodge about 4 miles from here. Their prices may be more suitable. Claire took the identification but did not move. The rain pressed harder against the tall windows, and the antique clock continued its measured ticking. Please repeat what you said about people who belong here. Ethan gave a short, humorless laugh. I do not have time for this. You had time to judge me. Natalie lowered her eyes. She knew the overnight occupancy report had shown 78% capacity. She also knew Ethan had marked Claire as a walk-in rejection without entering any legitimate reason. Claire turned slightly toward her. Is there a written dress requirement for guests? Natalie swallowed. No, ma'am. Ethan's head snapped toward her. Natalie, there is no dress requirement, she repeated, quieter but firmer. A subtle shift moved through the lobby. Ethan was no longer speaking for the hotel. He was speaking only for himself. His face reddened as he stepped back from the terminal. Fine. Then let us be direct. A person carrying a canvas bag, arriving alone this late, and questioning our procedures raises concerns. We have to consider fraud, disruption, and the comfort of paying guests. Claire's fingers tightened once around the strap of her bag, then relaxed. When she answered, her voice was almost gentle. I offered identification. I offered a valid credit card. I behaved respectfully. The only disruption in this lobby came from your decision to turn prejudice into policy. No one moved. Even the piano music seemed distant. Ethan stared at her, trapped between anger and embarrassment. Then, desperate to reclaim control, he reached beneath the desk and pressed the button that summoned hotel security. The clock behind him read 11:16 p.m. Claire looked at his name tag, then at the blinking light beneath his hand. You should be very certain about what you are doing next, she said. Ethan lifted his chin. I am protecting this hotel. Claire's eyes held his without wavering. No, you are showing it exactly who you are. The security door beside the elevators opened less than a minute later, and Samuel Reed crossed the lobby with the unhurried composure of a man who had spent 20 years solving problems without making them larger. At 51, Samuel knew the difference between danger and discomfort, and nothing about Claire suggested danger. She stood quietly beside the front desk, her identification in one hand and her canvas bag resting against her leg. Ethan pointed toward her before Samuel had even reached the counter. This woman refuses to leave after being denied service. Samuel looked at Claire, then at Natalie, then at the available room display still glowing behind Ethan. Has she threatened anyone? He asked. Ethan frowned. That is not relevant. Has she damaged property or disturbed another guest? She is challenging hotel policy. Samuel turned to Claire. Ma'am, have you been asked to leave? I was told there were no rooms, she replied. Then a room was given to guests who arrived after me. When I asked why, Mr. Caldwell suggested that my appearance made me unsuitable for this hotel. Samuel's expression barely changed, but his eyes hardened with disappointment. Is that accurate? Ethan folded his arms. I made a professional judgment. And now you want me to remove her because she questioned it? The silence that followed was quieter than the rain. Ethan glanced toward the watching guests and lowered his voice. I want the lobby cleared before this becomes more embarrassing. Samuel looked toward the windows, where wind pushed the rain sideways across the dark street. She is not causing the embarrassment. Natalie drew a slow breath, then stepped away from her terminal. She took a clean white towel from beneath the counter, filled a glass with water, and placed both near Claire. You can sit by the fireplace, ma'am, she said. Ethan stared at her. Natalie, return to your station. She is cold, Natalie answered. Offering a guest water does not require authorization. Claire accepted the towel with a quiet nod. Thank you. The simple gratitude struck Natalie more deeply than anger would have. Claire moved toward a leather chair beneath the antique clock, dried the rain from her coat, and set her canvas bag on the small table beside her. She did not look defeated. She looked patient. At 11:27 p.m., Ethan returned to the desk, but the confidence in his movements had become brittle. He opened and closed reservation windows without purpose, aware that Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore were still watching from the elevator corridor. The businessman near the fireplace had lowered his newspaper entirely. Samuel remained near the lobby entrance, not as an enforcer, but as a witness. Claire opened her bag and removed a thick folder secured with a dark blue ribbon. On the first page was a gold seal Ethan could not read from across the room. She checked several signatures, reviewed a financial statement, and compared the time on her phone with the clock above her. Natalie noticed the precision of it all. Are you waiting for someone? She asked softly. Claire looked up. For a transaction to clear. At this hour? Some decisions take longer than they should. Her eyes moved briefly toward Ethan. Others reveal themselves very quickly. At 11:41 p.m., Claire placed a call. Her voice remained low, but the lobby had become so still that several words carried across the marble floor. This is Claire Bennett. Proceed with the transfer. Keep the original terms. No changes to the purchase price. Ethan looked up sharply. Claire listened for a moment, then added, yes. I have seen enough to complete my review. She ended the call and returned the phone to her bag. Ethan gave a dismissive laugh, though unease had begun to settle behind his eyes. Pretending to conduct business will not change the situation, he said. Claire closed the folder and looked at the clock. You are right. The minute hand moved closer to midnight. The situation is about to change on its own. At 11:44 p.m., the telephone beneath Ethan's desk rang. He answered with practiced impatience, but his posture changed after the first sentence. The regional office was calling to confirm that representatives connected to the hotel's ownership transfer were expected before midnight. The new buyer had requested immediate access to the lobby, financial records, and senior night staff. Ethan's face tightened as he listened. Of course, he said. Everything is under control. He ended the call and looked around the lobby as though seeing it through the eyes of someone more powerful. The discarded towel beside Claire's chair, the watching guests, Samuel near the entrance, and Natalie standing with troubled silence suddenly appeared dangerous to him. Not because anyone had behaved improperly, but because the truth of the evening remained visible. The new ownership team is arriving, he announced to Natalie. The lobby must look professional. Natalie glanced toward Claire. It already did before you created this situation. Ethan ignored her. He straightened a stack of brochures, adjusted the brass bell, and ordered a bell attendant to remove an empty luggage cart. His movements became faster as the clock approached midnight. Claire remained seated beneath it, the dark blue ribbon resting across her folder. She seemed entirely untouched by his sudden urgency. Ethan watched her and made one final assumption. He decided she was not conducting a transaction. He decided she was waiting to embarrass him in front of the arriving executives. Ma'am, he said, walking from behind the desk, you need to leave now. Claire checked the time. I was told I could wait in the public area. That permission is withdrawn. Samuel stepped forward. On whose authority? Mine, Ethan answered. We have important guests arriving, and I will not have this lobby disrupted. Claire rose slowly. She slipped the folder into her canvas bag, but kept one document in her hand. Important guests, she repeated. Yes, Ethan said. People connected to the future of this property. Mrs. Whitmore, still waiting near the elevators, gave him a disbelieving look. She has done nothing wrong, she said. Ethan forced a smile. This is an internal matter. Claire buttoned her coat, and for an instant, everyone thought she might finally walk into the rain. Instead, she crossed the marble floor toward the large signing table near the center of the lobby. It had been arranged earlier that evening with polished chairs, bottled water, and a silver tray of fountain pens. She placed her document on the table and selected a black pen. Ethan followed her. That table is reserved. I know. You cannot use it. I believe you will find that I can. The revolving door began to move. 3 people entered beneath the golden lights of the entrance. Richard Halston came first, his silver hair damp from the rain and his expression burdened by a decision years in the making. Beside him walked Jonathan Price, carrying a leather briefcase, followed by a representative from the bank. Ethan hurried forward, leaving Claire at the table. Mr. Halston, welcome. We have prepared everything for the new owner's arrival. Richard did not take Ethan's offered hand. His attention had already moved past him. Ms. Bennett, he called warmly, walking toward Claire. Thank you for waiting. The final funds have cleared. Ethan's hand remained suspended in the air. Jonathan opened his briefcase and placed the closing documents beside Claire's pen. Only your final signature remains, he said. The antique clock read 11:55 p.m. Claire looked across the lobby at Natalie, Samuel, the silent guests, and finally Ethan. He stood perfectly still, watching every certainty he had trusted begin to collapse. Claire lowered her pen to the page. Then let us finish what we came here to do. Claire signed the first page with a steady hand. Jonathan turned it, indicated the next line, and she signed again. Each stroke of ink seemed to drain another trace of confidence from Ethan's face. Richard Halston stood beside the table in silence, watching the woman who had spent months negotiating the purchase of the property complete the final transfer under the same chandelier where she had just been told she did not belong. The bank representative checked the documents against the confirmation on his tablet. The funds have been received in full, he said. The ownership transfer will become effective at midnight. Ethan looked at the antique clock. 4 minutes remained. He stepped toward Richard, his voice suddenly careful. Mr. Halston, I believe there has been a misunderstanding. Richard turned to him. About what? The guest situation. I was following procedure. Natalie closed her eyes briefly. Samuel remained still near the entrance. Claire did not look up from the documents. Jonathan placed another page before her. Initial here, please. Ethan continued, speaking faster. She arrived without a reservation. Her circumstances were unclear, and I made a decision based on the safety and standards of the hotel. Claire finished her initials and placed the pen down. My circumstances were unclear because you never asked about them. Her voice carried across the lobby without effort. Ethan swallowed. I did ask whether you could afford the room. No, Claire said. You told me the price because you assumed I could not. Richard's expression hardened. Were rooms available? Natalie answered before Ethan could. Yes, sir. 12 standard rooms were vacant when Ms. Bennett arrived. Jonathan looked toward the front desk. Was her card declined? It was never processed, Natalie said. Ethan turned sharply. You do not know the full situation. I watched the full situation, Samuel replied. The clock moved to 11:58 p.m. Claire gathered the signed pages and handed them to Jonathan. Please confirm that the staff records, guest complaints, and security reports are included in the transfer. They are, he said. Ethan's breathing grew shallow. Ms. Bennett, had I known who you were, I would have handled this differently. Claire finally looked directly at him. That is exactly the problem. The words were quiet, but they landed with more force than anger. You believe respect should depend on knowing who has power. No one in the lobby moved. Mrs. Whitmore stood beside her husband with her hands folded tightly around her purse. The businessman near the fireplace lowered his gaze. Claire turned toward Natalie. You told the truth when it could have cost you. Then she looked at Samuel. And you refused to turn someone else's prejudice into your responsibility. Samuel gave a small nod. The first chime of midnight echoed through the lobby. Jonathan checked his watch as the second chime followed. The bank representative refreshed the transfer screen and smiled. The transaction is complete. Richard stepped beside Claire and faced the assembled staff. As of this moment, Claire Bennett is the legal owner of the Halston Grand and the building it occupies. The remaining chimes rang above them, filling the marble lobby one by one. Ethan stood behind the desk he had treated like a throne, but the authority he had borrowed from it was gone. Claire looked toward the reservation screen, where the same 12 rooms remained available. Then she returned her gaze to him. Now, she said, let us discuss the room you claimed did not exist. The final chime faded, and the lobby went silent. For several seconds, Ethan could not answer. The reservation screen glowed behind him, exposing the lie more clearly than any accusation could. Claire walked back toward the front desk, not with triumph, but with the calm focus of someone beginning an inspection. Open the occupancy report, she said. Ethan hesitated. Jonathan stepped beside her. Ms. Bennett now has full authority to review all operational records. Natalie moved to the terminal and entered her credentials. The report appeared immediately. 12 standard rooms remained vacant, along with 2 suites and 1 accessible room. Claire studied the numbers, then looked at Ethan. You denied a paying guest while nearly 1/4 of the hotel was empty. Ethan lowered his voice. I made a judgment based on experience. Experience with what? Claire asked. Fraud? Disturbance? Or people whose clothing does not impress you? Ethan's mouth opened, but no answer came. Claire turned to Natalie. Was any formal reason entered for the refusal? Natalie searched the system. No, ma'am. He marked the interaction as a guest withdrawal. A quiet murmur moved through the lobby. Claire's expression changed for the first time. Not anger, exactly. Disappointment. So the record says I chose to leave. Ethan looked toward Richard Halston, hoping for rescue from the man who had once signed his paychecks. Richard did not look back. That is how complaints disappear, Claire continued. A guest is humiliated, the system records nothing, and the employee responsible faces no question. She asked Jonathan to request every walk-in rejection from the previous 12 months, along with security logs, refund disputes, and unresolved guest complaints. Ethan's face turned pale. You cannot assume every decision was discriminatory. I am not assuming, Claire said. That is why there will be an investigation. He swallowed. Are you firing me? The question carried less arrogance now. It sounded almost human. Claire considered him for a moment. You are suspended from guest-facing duties effective immediately. You will receive due process, the same fairness you refused to offer me. Ethan stared at the counter. A few minutes earlier, he had believed power meant ending a conversation. Claire was showing him that real power meant being accountable for how decisions were made. She turned to Samuel. Please secure Mr. Caldwell's access badge and escort him to the staff office. Quietly and respectfully. Samuel nodded. Ethan removed the badge from his jacket and placed it on the counter. His hand trembled slightly. Before he left, he looked at Claire. I am sorry. Claire met his eyes. You are sorry because you know who I am now. Ethan said nothing. The person you need to understand is the woman you thought I was before midnight. The words followed him across the marble floor. When the security door closed, Claire turned to Natalie. You will serve as acting night supervisor until management completes its review. Natalie stared at her. I am only an assistant clerk. Tonight, you chose honesty when silence would have been easier. Leadership begins there. Then Claire looked toward the entrance, where rain still moved across the glass. Please prepare the smallest available standard room for me. Natalie blinked. The presidential suite is ready. Claire gave a faint smile. I did not come here to prove I deserve luxury. I came to learn whether ordinary guests receive dignity. The lobby fell quiet again, but this silence was different. It no longer carried shame. It carried recognition. By 12:18 a.m., the Halston Grand no longer felt like the same hotel. The chandeliers still burned with the same golden light. The piano music still floated through the lobby, and the rain still traced silver lines down the windows, but the balance of the room had shifted. Natalie stood behind the front desk with a new steadiness in her posture as she prepared a key for room 604, a modest king room overlooking the alley rather than the harbor. Claire accepted it without complaint. Before I go upstairs, she said, I want the overnight staff gathered here. Within minutes, housekeepers, bell attendants, kitchen employees, and maintenance workers entered the lobby with uncertain expressions. Some had been told there was a new owner. Others had only heard that Ethan had been removed from the desk. Claire stood beside the signing table, still wearing the same rain-damp coat that had caused Ethan to dismiss her. She did not stand behind the counter. She stood in front of it, at the same level as everyone else. Tonight, I learned more about this hotel in 1 hour than I could have learned from a month of reports, she said. I saw one employee use the name of the hotel to justify his prejudice. I also saw others choose honesty, restraint, and kindness when doing so carried risk. Samuel lowered his head slightly. Natalie held Claire's words in silence. Claire explained that no one would lose a job simply because ownership had changed. Every employee would be reviewed fairly, and every complaint would be examined with evidence. However, beginning immediately, no guest could be denied service based on clothing, accent, occupation, age, or perceived income. A luxury hotel is not defined by how quickly it recognizes wealth, she said. It is defined by how respectfully it treats people whose wealth is not visible. One of the housekeepers, an older woman named Teresa Morales, raised her hand. Ms. Bennett, will staff be allowed to report managers without retaliation? Claire looked at her. Yes, directly to my office, if necessary. Teresa's eyes filled with relief, though she quickly blinked it away. That small reaction told Claire there were deeper problems hidden behind polished doors. She asked Jonathan to establish an independent reporting line before morning. She also ordered a full review of employee schedules, unpaid overtime complaints, and promotion practices. Richard Halston watched from a distance, realizing how rarely previous ownership had asked the people who cleaned the rooms what they had witnessed. At 12:31 a.m., Natalie handed Claire the key card. Room 604 is ready. Claire took it, then paused. Please place a note in the system. Tomorrow morning, I want to check out like any other guest. No special treatment. Natalie smiled for the first time that night. Yes, Miss Bennett. Claire crossed toward the elevators, but Mrs. Whitmore stepped into her path. I am sorry we accepted the suite after hearing there were no rooms, she said. We should have spoken sooner. Claire answered gently. Most unfair systems survive because decent people decide the moment is not theirs to interrupt. Mrs. Whitmore nodded, chastened. The elevator doors opened, reflecting Claire's simple coat against brass and mirrored glass. Before stepping inside, she turned back toward the lobby. Natalie was helping a tired traveler at the desk. Samuel was offering an umbrella to a delivery driver waiting near the entrance. Teresa was speaking quietly with Jonathan about a complaint she had carried for months. The building had changed owners at midnight, but ownership alone was not the transformation Claire wanted. She pressed the button for the 6th floor, and as the doors closed, she understood that real change would begin with what happened after the applause, after the shock, and after. No one important seemed to be watching. 3 months later, winter sunlight poured through the tall windows of the Halston Grand, warming the same marble floor where Claire Bennett had once been treated like an intruder. The chandeliers still glittered, but the hotel beneath them had changed in ways no renovation could fully explain. A new service policy stood behind the front desk, not as decoration, but as a promise. Every guest would be welcomed before being evaluated. Every refusal required a documented reason. Every employee could report misconduct without fear of retaliation. Natalie Brooks now served as guest services manager, and the quiet confidence Claire had recognized that first night had grown into thoughtful leadership. Samuel Reed directed staff safety and conflict training, teaching employees that protecting a hotel never meant humiliating the people inside it. Teresa Morales had been promoted to housekeeping operations supervisor after the investigation revealed years of unpaid overtime and ignored complaints. Claire corrected the records, restored the lost wages, and required every department head to spend one full shift working beside the employees whose labor kept the hotel alive. Ethan Caldwell's investigation uncovered several earlier incidents in which ordinary guests had been discouraged, delayed, or falsely told that rooms were unavailable. Claire could have ended his employment without another conversation. Instead, she offered him a choice. He could leave with a formal record of misconduct, or he could complete 6 weeks of customer service training, volunteer at a community shelter, and return in a junior position under supervision. Ethan chose to return. Pride made the first days difficult. He had once believed leadership meant standing above others. Now he carried luggage, answered basic questions, and listened to travelers whose clothing revealed nothing about their lives. Slowly, embarrassment became understanding. One snowy evening, an older white woman entered wearing a faded green coat and carrying a grocery bag tied with string. She explained that her bus had been canceled and asked whether the hotel had an inexpensive room. Ethan looked at her worn boots, then at the reservation screen. Months earlier, he would have decided who she was before asking her name. This time he smiled. "Welcome to the Halston Grand. Let me see what we can arrange." He found a standard room, applied the emergency weather rate Claire had created, and asked Samuel to bring the woman a cup of hot coffee. From the far side of the lobby, Claire watched without announcing herself. She wore the same beige coat and carried the same canvas bag. Ethan noticed her only after handing the woman her key. For a moment, their eyes met. Claire gave him a small nod. It was not forgiveness without accountability, and it was not praise for basic decency. It was recognition that people could change when consequences were joined with responsibility. Ethan looked toward the antique clock above the desk. He still remembered every chime from that midnight, but the memory no longer felt like the moment he lost authority. It felt like the moment he first understood it. Claire crossed the lobby as employees greeted guests arriving from the cold. Some wore tailored suits. Others carried backpacks, work uniforms, or weathered bags. No one was asked to prove they belonged before receiving kindness. The building had become Claire's with a signature, but its character had been rebuilt through hundreds of quieter choices. And beneath the golden lights, the hotel finally learned that dignity is not a privilege reserved for the impressive. It is the first thing every human being should receive.